Once again, Christian greetings to all our valued listeners and viewers throughout the whole world. This is our special episode number 16. Last final warning messages just follow in the present condition. This is the Exposition. And now let us focus our attention to the subject of Revelation chapter 10. Remember, brethren, the subject of Revelation chapter 10 is concerning the book of Nahom. That is the little book recorded in Revelation 10 verse 2. According to the chapter 1, that little book is the book of Nahom. OTG in Philippines 3. And the particular object in view is to the time when the entire book of Daniel is completely revealed, completely understood. For that what it means by the illustration that the book is open. And we read several times in the symbolic code 8 to 10, page 8, in the days of bitter heart, there are still some portions of the book of Daniel which is yet closed. So there are still portions in the book of Daniel which is not yet completely understood in the days of bitter heart. Now the book of Daniel, let us divide only in two occurrences. The occurrences that takes place in the heavenly sanctuary and the occurrences that takes place on earth. And the occurrences that takes place on the heavenly sanctuary is only bookwork transaction. According to the Shepherd's Rod, White House Recruiter, page 20. Or concerning the judicial proceedings that took place in the heavenly sanctuary. Now, as we stated, that the focal point on the subject of Revelation chapter 10 is the last two verses, which is a part of the subject on Revelation chapter 10, which is the first two verses on Revelation 11. So the first two verses in Revelation 11 is the last two verses as the focal point of the subject in Revelation chapter 10. And as far as Revelation 11 verse 1 and 2 are thus concerned, verse 1, there is a divine command given by God to His servant to measure the temple, to measure the altar, and to measure the worshippers. But on verse 2, it is also a divine command saying, "Thou shalt not measure the court which is without." Now, focusing first. Revelation 11 verse 1. The shepherd's son says that the measuring is figurative of the same word, investigative or investigation. Here in tract number 5, tract number 5, on page 109, it says, and as the measuring is figurative of the same word. What word? Investigative judgment or investigation. It says, and as the measuring is figurative of the same word, then it leads to the conclusion that the temple, the altar, and them that worship therein must figuratively represent the three classes to be judged. Judged where? In the holy place. So, as far as Revelation 11 verse 1 is thus concerned, it points out to the proceedings in the holy place, by which the great multitude on Revelation 7 verse 9, they will no longer to pass the investigation in the holy place. They will no longer undergo the proceedings in the holy place. Why? Because according to the shepherd's rod, in tract number 5, 110, it says, the court, in other words, is symbolical of the immeasurable, innumerable harvest of second fruits brought in after the measurable, numerable harvest of first fruits, the 144,000. It is not measured, meaning investigated, because it represents those among whom there are no bad to be cast out, for they are gathered in after the cleansing of the heavenly temple. Now, I would like to try my best again, brothers and sisters, to explain it more clearly. Brothers and sisters, the statement that the great multitude will no longer be measured, meaning I would like to read again. It says, it is not measured, meaning investigated, because it represents those among whom there are no bad to be cast out. For they are gathered in after the cleansing of the heavenly temple. Why is it that the great multitude, they will no longer be measured? What does it mean? They will no longer be investigated. They will no longer pass the investigation. Where? In the holy place. What is the investigation in the holy place? Blotting out of names. Why is it that the great multitude, they will no longer pass the investigation in the holy place? Because they will be gathered into the holy place, by which at that time, the holy place is already cleansed. And the only names to be brought into the holy place are the names of the righteous. There will be no more names of the wicked to be allowed to written or to enter therein. You see, brothers and sisters, That is why the shepherd says in R 187 that in order for us to have a proper understanding concerning the subject of the seven seals, we need to understand the heavenly sanctuary service. For it is in the sanctuary construction and service is revealed the plan of salvation. The only investigation in the holy place is blotting out of names. Or in other words, the investigation in the holy place is a judicial proceedings to determine whose names to be blotted out and whose names to be retained. Such proceedings is in the holy place. But the proceedings in the most holy place is only for the righteous, because the proceedings in the most holy place is blotting out of sins. And the only sins to be blotted out are the righteous. The sins of the wicked will never be blotted out. And that is why there is a divine decree that only the righteous can enter the most holy place. The names of the wicked can never enter to the most holy place. Now let's go back again, brothers and sisters, in Revelation 11, verse 1. What does it mean by the word measure? Investigated. The word measure is the same with the statement investigated. There are three classes that have been commanded by God to the messenger. Measure. Measure the temple, measure the altar, measure the worshipers. So such knowledge, brothers and sisters, is easy to understand. That servant of God, he had been given the information concerning the proceedings of the temple, the proceedings of the altar, and as well as the proceedings of the worshipers. The temple represents those who died under the first 5 seals, but the altar represents those who died under the 6th seal. So the focal point, I would like to go directly to the altar. So that is the statement in 2SR 162, saying, but when our high priest shall begin the atonement for the living, there must be a message of present truth, sounding of the trumpet, urging everyone to lay hold on the Lamb of God, come to the sanctuary, confess his sin, and secure his life. Unless the close of the judgment for the dead and the commencement for the living be made known to us, we would have no present truth, while the judgment for the living is in session. The word unless is synonymous to the word except. Unless the close of the judgment for the dead. Of course, the close of the judgment for the dead, that is the 6th seal. Because the temple is the first class of the dead, and the altar is the second and the last. So the statement, the close of the judgment for the dead, pertaining to the altar. That the judgment that pertains to the living cannot commence not until the judgment that pertains to the dead is closed. And unless that knowledge is bestowed unto us, then we have no present truth. to SR 164. If we have no present truth, then we are in spiritual poverty. Now, brothers and sisters, Revelation 11, verse 1 and verse 2 is a very important prophecy. Very important. And no one can deny that 42 months in Revelation 11 verse 2 is what causes the being divided into different groups, because they engage in private interpretation. And the result was confusion, embarrassment. But 100%, there must be divine interpretation in Revelation 11 verse 2. That the divine principle in track number 2, page 12 says, never it had been fulfilled and not been revealed. Track number 2, page 12. Or in other words, God will not allow that such prophecy will be fulfilled without first revealing the importance of such prophecy to His people. And if God revealed to us this present year, 2021, the only tenable conclusion is that the fulfillment of the prophecy is soon, very soon, to be realized. It will be materialized. By which the focal point, brothers and sisters, in reality is in the heavenly sanctuary. Now, I would like to read again the statement in Luke 21. Luke 21 verse 24. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. It says, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. What does it mean? Until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Now, let's read again track number 5. Page 110 and page 111. It says, track number 5, 110 and 111. It says, it is not measured, meaning investigated, because it represents those among whom there are no bad to be cast out, for they are gathered in after the cleansing of the heavenly temple. What is the specific place by which the great multitude will be gathered in? First, pointing to the holy place. They will be gathered in the holy place. After the sanctuary, represented by the holy place, had been cleansed. Then it says, after the judgment of the dead. When does the great multitude will be gathered, brothers and sisters, into the most holy place? After the judgment of the dead. That is why the preposition of indicates most holy place. And then it says, after the separation of the bad from among the good in the church, as illustrated by the parable of the net, Matthew 13, verse 47 and 48. So there are three word after here. After the cleansing of the heavenly temple, after the judgment of the dead, then after the separation of the bad from among the good. Three distinct separate events. First, pointing to the holy place. Second, pointing to the most holy place. And third, pointing to the church on earth. That the great multitude will be brought into the church after the separation of the bad from among the good in the church. Then it says, they are those who by name, my people, Revelation 18 verse 4, are called to come out of Babylon, and who with no unclean among them, Isaiah 52 verse 1, come into the already purified and living church of God. For more, it says, extensive treatment of the subject of the investigative judgment, see our track number 3, the Harvest 3rd edition. Then it says, the 40 and 2 months, allowing 30 days to a month, and reckoning a day for a year, Ezekiel 4 verse 6, represent the 1,260 year prophetic period, 538 AD to 1798 AD. So if the 42 months is prophetic, then it must be 1,260 years. It says, see the Shepherd's Rod, Volume 2, page 142 and 261. The Gentiles here mentioned are those who tread underfoot the holy city, the church. What is the holy city there? The church. Let us distinctly separate Jerusalem, which is the place in the Middle East, and Jerusalem, which is represented by the church. Now let's read again the statement here. It says, the Gentiles here mentioned are those who tread underfoot the holy city, the church, an act which calls our attention to the Master's prediction concerning the faith of the saints during this 40 and 2 months period. And they, the church, shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away from the promised land, captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down by the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Luke 21 verse 24, the times that the Gentiles go out of Jerusalem, and the Israelites go in. The occupation of the promised land by the Gentiles today was typified by the yesterday's Gentiles' occupation of it. And when ancient Israel returned from Egypt to the land of promise, the times of the Gentiles in those days were fulfilled. Likewise now, when antitypical Israel, the 144,000 guileless servants
of God are sealed and taken to Mount Zion, there to stand with the Lamb. The times of the Gentiles in these days will be fulfilled.
Now here the sharper's rod declared clearly that Luke 21 verse 24 is closely connected to Revelation 11 verse 2. And not only Luke 21 verse 24, but as well as that predicted event when the 144,000 will be delivered from the Egyptian bondage and brought to the promised land. Now, ponder deeply, brothers and sisters. The connection of Luke 21 verse 24 to Revelation 11 verse 2, as well as that predicted event when 144,000 will get out of Egypt. Now, I would like to read to you Bible commentary. Let's read the Bible commentary. 5 BC, 11:2. 5 BC, 11:2. Since to be repeated. After speaking of the end of the world, Jesus comes back to Jerusalem. The city then sitting in pride and arrogance and saying, I sit a queen, and shall see no sorrow. As his prophetic eye rested upon Jerusalem, he sees that as she was given up to destruction, the world will be given up to its doom. The sins that transpired at the destruction of Jerusalem will be repeated at the great and terrible day of the Lord, but in a more fearful manner. 5 BC 11:2-3. So the voice of inspiration is very plain that occurrence that took place in Jerusalem in 70 AD will be repeated again, but in a more fearful manner. When? It is in the period of the great and terrible day of the Lord. What is that period? Great and terrible day of the Lord? Or great and dreadful day of the Lord? Judgment for the living. 1 TG number 28, page 15, it says, the great and dreadful day of the Lord, the judgment for the living. So the great and dreadful day of the Lord, that is the period of the judgment for the living. Here's another statement in 1 TG 11, page 2. Blind to this truth, to the judgment for the living, the great and dreadful day of the Lord. So it says, the great and dreadful day of the Lord. When would be the repetition of that occurrence? The destruction of Jerusalem? According to the prophecy, it will be repeated again in the period of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. What is the great and dreadful day of the Lord? The judgment that pertains to the living. I would like to read to you this reading and Testimonies for the Church. Volume 5. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 5, page 400. 464.
It says, "It is no time now for God's people to be fixing their affections or laying up their treasure in the world. The time is not far distant when, like the early disciples, we shall be forced to seek a refuge in desolate and solitary places." As the siege of Jerusalem by the Roman armies was the signal for flight to the Judean Christians, so the assumption of power on the part of our nation in the decree enforcing the papal Sabbath will be a warning to us. It will then be time to leave the large cities, preparatory to leaving the smaller ones for retired homes in secluded places among the mountains. Volume 5, page 464 and page 465. And there's another statement that I would like to read. It says, 451 in volume 5. As the approach of the Roman armies was assigned to the disciples of the impending destruction of Jerusalem, so may this apostasy be assigned to us that the limit of God's forbearance is reached, that the measure of our nation's iniquity is full, and that the angel of mercy is about to take her flight, never to return. The people of God will then be plunged into those scenes of affliction and distress which prophets have described as the time of Jacob's trouble. Volume 5, page 451. What event mentioned here? So we need to read the upper portion. It says, "By the decree enforcing the institution of the papacy in violation of the law of God, our nation will disconnect herself fully from righteousness." When Protestantism shall stretch her hands across the gulf to grasp the hand of the Roman power, when she shall reach over the abyss to clasp hands with spiritualism, when under the influence of this threefold union, our country shall repudiate every principle of its constitution as a Protestant and Republican government, and shall make provision for the propagation of papal falsehoods and delusions, then we may know that the time has come for the marvelous working of Satan, and that the end is near. Now, ponder deeply, brothers and sisters, those passages that we have just read. The great controversy I would like to read the great controversy on page 30. Not one Christian perished in the destruction of Jerusalem. You see, not one Christian perished in the destruction of Jerusalem. Christ had given His disciples warning, and all who believe His words watch for the promised sign. So God gave His disciples warning, and all who believe His words watch for the promised sign. And what is the promised sign? When ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, said Jesus, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out. Luke 21, verse 20 and verse 21. When does the sign appear? 66 AD. During the time, the Jewish people are celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles. And it was surrounded by the soldiers of Sistius. But according to the historical event, I would like to read, let's read again, the Great Controversy, page 30. After the Romans under Sistius had surrounded the city, they unexpectedly abandoned the siege when everything seemed favorable for an immediate attack. Why is it that Sistius abandoned the siege? It says, the besieged, despairing of successful resistance, were on the point of surrender when the Roman general withdrew his forces without less apparent reason. Why? It says, but God's merciful providence, it is God who directed Sistius, was directing events for the good of his own people. The promised sign had been given to the waiting Christians, and now an opportunity was offered for all who would to obey the Savior's warning. Events were so overruled that neither Jews nor Romans should hinder the plight of the Christians. Upon the retreat of Sistius, the Jews sallying from Jerusalem pursued after his retiring army. And while both forces were thus fully engaged, the Christians had an opportunity to leave the city. At this time, the country also had been cleared from, it says, the country has been cleared of enemies who might have endeavored to intercept them. At the time of the siege, the Jews were assembled at Jerusalem to keep the Feast of Tabernacles, and thus the Christians throughout the land were able to make their escape unmolested. Without delay, they fled to a place of safety, the city of Pelia, in the land of Perea, beyond Jordan. And that historical event is typological according to the voice of inspiration. I would like to read to you here in 2 TG 24. TG number 24 on page 20. 2TG 24, page 20. It says, let us consider another example. This one in Jesus' time. The Jews in his time had even greater faith in the scriptures than any before them. With the scriptures, they accused, tried, and crucified the Lord. The thing in which they had no faith was Jesus' interpretations of the scriptures. As a result, some years later, their city was destroyed, and everyone that was found in it burned as rats, only because they failed to heed Jesus' instruction. Now, how about unto us, brothers and sisters? Is there no sign that had been given by God to us? Now, I remember the statement on, I think, Desire of Creed. It says, Christ gave his disciples a sign of the ruler to come on Jerusalem, and he told them how to escape. When ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. For this be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. This warning was given to be heeded 40 years after, at the destruction of Jerusalem. The Christians obeyed the warning, and not a Christian perished in the fall of the city. Now, how about unto us, brothers and sisters? In the last generation of men. Now, here in page 634, it says, Desire of Ages. So Christ's disciples were given warning of the destruction of Jerusalem. Those who watched for the sign of the coming ruin and fled from the city escaped the destruction. So now, we are given warning of Christ's second coming and of the destruction to fall upon the world. Those who heed the warning will be saved. So what is the warning? What is the sign that had been given by God unto us? I think, brothers and sisters, of all the books, inspired writings, the sign concerning the destruction of this world is even in more abundance in the Shepherd's Rod publications than any other inspired writings. Or in other words, the Shepherd's Rod publications is directed, or the focal point is to the judgment that pertains to the living. Because the writings of Sister White is directed to the judgment that pertains to the dead. So what we need to do is, we need to love each other. We need to help each other to study the Shepherd's Rod. Instead of fighting against each other, we need to help each other. If we are sincere and honest, there is no reason that we will fight against each other. Because if I am honest and you are honest, then our only objective is to know what the Shepherd's Rod teaches. And the Shepherd's Rod publications are all available to us. And there is no reason to stay in the darkness. Now, for example, I would like to read the track number 15. Track number 15, pages 54 and page 55. Looking forward to these celestial demonstrations, the signs of the times. What is the signs of the times? The celestial demonstrations. Track 15, page 54 and page 55. Looking forward to these celestial demonstrations, the signs of the times, Jesus forewarned that they were to appear immediately after the tribulation. Immediately after the tribulation had ceased, Matthew 24 verse 29. So while peace, wars, commercialism, script, and persecution are the signs of the times and the identification of the first 5 seals, what is the first 5 seals? The temple. That is the generation from Adam to 1844. Then it says, in like manner, the earthquake, The dark day and the meteoric shower are the signs of the times and the identification of the sixth seal. Now think it thoroughly, brothers and sisters. The statement here in tract number 15, page 55, it says, in like manner, the earthquake, that is the Lisbon earthquake, the dark day, that is the darkening of the sun, and the meteoric shower are the signs of the times and the identification of the sixth seal. Why is it that that phenomenon, the moon become blood, is not mentioned here? It's so because that phenomenon, the moon become blood, is even more pointing to the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Now let us read, brothers and sisters, page 56 in tract 15. The moon associated with the sun makes a fitting symbol of the church, the agency by which the Word of God, the light of the world, is reflected. The moon's becoming as blood immediately following the darkening of the sun, refusing to reflect light, would be an appropriate omen of the church having finished her work of salvation, no longer needing to reflect the light of the gospel. And the church herself is, of course, at that time imbued with eternal life, delivered from destruction, as were the firstborn in the dwellings where the doorposts had been painted with the sacrificial blood on the evening of the Passover in the land of Egypt. Tract number 15, page 56. So it was connected to that event. The midnight slaughtering in the land of Egypt, by which all the firstborn sons had been destroyed, perished. Those by which there is no blood in the doorpost. And we know that the significance in our lives is easy to understand. The firstborn sons represent ministry. All the ministry, all movements by which there is no blood on the doorpost, meaning there is no present truth in that movement. The only movement recognized by God as His is the movement where the present truth is bestowed by God into that movement. So all ministry by which there is no blood, there is no present truth. Because the life is in the blood. And the present truth is the spirit of life. Here in 1 SR, on page 123, it says, Christ referred to water as a symbol of everlasting life. The meaning of the symbol of drinking the water with the barley cakes is that souls were to be saved by its new truth, the spirit of life. What is the spirit of life? The new truth. What is the new truth? Present truth. It says here in track number 3, page 9, always man's greatest test and one which has ever involved almost an instantaneous decision has been in the unrolling of the scroll, in the eclipse of a past message by a new one, present truth. What is the new one? Present truth. And that new truth, the new one, which is the present truth, that is the Spirit of life, represented by the blood, because the life is in the blood. The same with the statement in 2TG 23, page 7. 2TG 23, page 7, it says, here's the apostle introduces another law. That is Romans 8, verse 2. Here the apostles introduces another law. The law of the Spirit of life. 3 laws in all. The law of 10 commandments. Second, the law of the flesh. Third, the law of the Spirit of life. But this third law, let us remember, it is in Christ, and it makes us free from the law of sin and death only if we be in Him. And that is the present truth. The invisible Christ. So all the ministry by which the present truth is not bestowed by God into that movement, there is no blood, there is no life. And all of them will perish, typifying all the firstborn sons in the land of Egypt. Brethren, according to track number 15, let's read again on page 55. These global disturbances and celestial exhibitions between the years 1755 and 1833 in themselves, however, appear to be forecasts of the things which takes place during the great and dreadful day of the Lord. If this be true, then the earthquake foreshadows the forthcoming shaking, sifting among the nations as predicted by the prophets Isaiah 30, verse 27 and 28, and Nahom chapter 2, verse 3. Do you remember Nahom chapter 2? That is World War II. When World War II will be resumed again. So we need to study closely, brothers and sisters, the connection of the phenomenon that occurred prior to the time when Jesus Christ entered to the most holy place. Less moon earthquake, darkening of the sun, moon become blood, and the falling of the stars. This 4 is the one mentioned in track number 5, page 34. Kindred events, related events, contributory events, and consequent to the main prophetic event. Track number 5, page 34. And in our next episode, we will show to you how accurate the Bible as explained by the Shankar's Bible. Do not forget our reading in track 15 on page 55. Right? Isaiah 30, verse 27 and 28 is attached to Nahom 2, verse 3. What is Nahom chapter 2? Pointing to the World War II. Remember, brethren, according to 1TG, number 24, 1TG number 24, on page 18 and page 19, what is the overall purpose of Nahom's prophecy? You see, it is overall purpose. 1TG 24, page 18 and 19. What is the overall purpose of Nahom's prophecy? It is to enlighten God's people of the signs of the times. Now, brothers and sisters, there are only 3 signs of the times. The signs of the times that represent by the temple, the signs of the times that represent by the altar, and the signs of the times that represented by the worshippers. As mentioned in tract number 15, page 54 and page 55. What is the overall purpose of Nahom's prophecy? It is to enlighten God's people of the signs of the times. What is the signs of the times? If you will read tract number 15, page 5, it says, the 7 seals, the signs of the times. Tract number 15, page 5, the 7 seals, the signs of the times. In 1TG number 51, it says here, on page 5 and page 6, if the church is not commensurably growing and expanding, then how can she be a living church? And how can she keep up with the signs of the times and with the progress in the sanctuary above? So when we'll be studying signs of the times, it points out to the progress in the sanctuary above, the proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary. So I would like to read again 1TG 24, page 18 and 19. What is the overall purpose of Nahom's prophecy? It is to enlighten God's people of the signs of the times, to make them aware that the great and dreadful day of the Lord is at hand, that the purification of the church, the judgment in the house of God, 1 Peter 4:17, is soon to take place, that the wicked shall not much longer be in their midst, that the redemption of the righteous is at hand, that they must not fail to perform their God-given duties. Indeed, Nahum's prophecy clearly identifies God's people of today under the Assyrian yoke and points to their liberation. So our subject is the book of Isaiah, the gospel prophet, Nahum, as well as the parables of Jesus Christ, and the book of Revelation, and the book of Daniel. The climactic point is pointing to the deliverance of God's people. And we need to prepare for that event, my dear brothers and sisters. There's no reason that we need to fight against each other. But rather, we need to love each other. We need to help each other because we have the same goal, we have the same aim, to be in God's kingdom. Brothers and sisters, the time is no longer fast. The time is past running out. So hoping that to all my fellow shepherds and believers, it is high time now, brothers and sisters. We need to help each other. We need to love each other. And we need to pray each other. Thank you very much for listening and being strong. Hoping to see you in God's kingdom. And hoping that you will continually watch this video.
because we will gradually decipher to you that the Shepherd's Rod publications are sufficient. The information given is sufficient that we could be able to understand the year from our Lord delivered us. Thank you very much for viewing this program. May the good Lord bless you and have a beautiful, wonderful evening.